Hey, Morgan family, we're back with video number 2, and today we're going to explore the Maness family, Martha Ella Maness Morgan's family. Martha was married to George Felix Morgan, and we talked about the Morgan line on the first video. And let me add a couple of things on that before we move on to the Manesses, because we really need to emphasize ancestor Gideon Rufus Morgan. But Gideon Rufus Morgan was important in history because he was a Minuteman in Massachusetts. I made reference to his Revolutionary War service in the first video, but I really didn't do it justice. If you go research Gideon Rufus Morgan, you're going to find a lot there, and you are all descended from this famous Massachusetts Minuteman. But the main thing I wanted to share with you is you're all eligible for membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR if you're a woman, and the Sons of the American Revolution, SAR, if you're a man. Now, not everybody's interested in joining that. I joined the SAR back in the early 80s through one of my ancestors. You all have several Revolutionary War patriots that you could qualify for the DAR and the SAR, and I just want to make sure you know that. I think it's a real specialized desire. Not everybody would enjoy that. I've been a member of a couple of chapters. They have chapters all over the country. There's several in North Carolina, and other states have the chapters, and you can join any chapter on your ancestor, and it takes a little bit of work to get in it. You have to send in a chart with every generation, but the good thing is a lot of the work's already done because you all have verified and bona fide Revolutionary War patriots. So a lot of the work's done for you if you're interested in joining. Not everybody, most people are not interested in it. And somebody told me when I was a younger man, well, what do you want to join that for? It's just a bunch of old men sitting around talking about history. Well, that was my life. I made my living off of teaching history. So that was right up my alley. And I wasn't an old man back then. And I loved going and hearing about the history. And the SAR and the DAR do a lot of things. They give scholarships to people. They promote historical learning. They promote the preservation of the history of our country and the honoring of it, which is important right now. And they reenact. They do some reenactments. They also, you don't have to do all of that, but it's available. They do grave markings for Revolutionary War patriots whose graves are not marked to signify their service. They provide color guards for parades and ceremonies. They do a lot of things. And if you're interested in that, you or your children or grandchildren are eligible to join under several patriots, including Gideon Rufus Morgan. So I just want to make sure. Sometimes for people, it's just enough to know that you're eligible to join. For instance, the Jamestown Society, people who are the descendants of the first settlers at Jamestown in the early 1600s. Y'all are eligible for that, and I'll get to that in a later video, and I am too. But I don't join it because it costs $600, and I can't drive to Jamestown, Virginia for the meetings, so I don't join it. But it's kind of neat to know you qualify whether you join it or not. And they've all got websites. You can go find them and look at them and see what they do. But I just want to tell you that you have some illustrious ancestors, and Gideon Rufus Morgan is worth extra study. Okay, let's move on to the Manises. We're going to focus and start with Martha Ella Maness, who married George Felix Morgan. Donna called her Ma, and she's somebody that some of you will remember. She died in 1971, so those old enough will remember Ma. And I've got a picture of her here. I know all of you've probably seen it. Let me see where Ma's at here. This is the one that a lot of people know. This probably was not too long before she died. And then we've got the one from the group photo that everybody, if I can get it to where the light won't shine on it and you can see it. Let me pull it up close. Come on, Ma. Everybody wants to see you. There we go. Everybody remembers that picture. That's who we're talking about today. And she was born in 1889 and died in 1971. She's buried at West Hill Cemetery in Georgia. And I keep looking down here because I'm looking at my notes. I'll try to put them up here a little bit closer. I'm not going to say a whole lot about that generation because some of the older ones will remember them. And there's really not a whole lot to say except they were pretty much farmers in Georgia. But I did find something I think is interesting, and if anybody knows the story behind this, I would like to know it. Pardon me for my allergy. Fall and spring is pretty hard. In 1910, on the 1910 Georgia census, Ella and George were, of course, living in Whitfield County, Georgia, and they were farming. And they had come from Texas with their mother when they went. They all went out. All those Morgans went out to Texas in the late 1800s, and George Morgan, of course, was born in Georgia, but he went to Texas when they were small. And then they came after his daddy Will died. They all came. Not all of them, but that branch came back to Georgia, and that's where then George married Ella Manises. Well, in 1910, they were back already. Will had died, and so George and Ella were living in Whitfield County, and they had a boarder with them named James Owens. And he was listed as a boarder, farmhand and a boarder, and he was born in Texas. That was on the census, and he was a deaf mute. I have no idea who James Owens is. So, and Donna's going to try to ask some of her aunts. Her mother didn't know. Runell didn't know who James Owens was. Never heard of it. Does anybody know why this? Was he a family member that came out from Texas and they just took care? Well, they didn't take care of him. He worked on the farm, but he was a deaf mute. I'm sure he needed some assistance back then. But if anybody knows about James Owens living with Ella and George Morgan, I can't find out when he died, and I can't find out where he's buried. But he's probably there. He's probably there in Georgia, unless he went back to Texas eventually. He was 55 years old in 1910. So, he was born in the mid 1800s. But if y'all know anything, let me know. So let's move on up the tree. Martha Ella Manises Morgan's father was William A. Manises. One researcher says the A is for Arthur. I don't know that for sure. I can't find a document. We do know it's William A. Manises, and he was born in 1861, and he died in 1932. And I can't find a document where he's buried, but his wife, Molly Hackney Manises, is buried at Deep Springs in Georgia, Deep Springs Cemetery. So I'm assuming that William is there too, but there's just not a lot of information on William A. Manises. I couldn't find hardly anything. He was just a farmer that lived there in Whitfield County, lived his life. He died during the Depression. His wife, Molly Hackney, was the son of James Brantley Hackney, and they were Irish immigrants a couple of generations back. So there's not a whole lot on the Hackney family that goes back very far. They just go back a couple of generations that we can find beyond Molly. Molly died in 1929, and she is buried at Deep Springs. So I sent an email to Deep Springs Church to ask them if they have records on who's buried there. So hopefully they'll answer me. If anybody from Georgia's watching, if you want to contact Deep Springs Church and ask them if they have a record that William A. Manises is buried there, that would be very helpful. That would be great. So WikiTree, the family tree on WikiTree that I posted the link for you leaves that generation out. They go directly from Martha Ella Manises to John C. Manises, and that's not right. John was Ella's grandfather who fought in the Civil War. And they left that. I'm going to try to correct it. So I'll put the link back up and hopefully I can get it corrected. WikiTree is real tricky to work with, but it's free. It's easy to read and it's quick. That's why I put it up. But if you go there and it goes directly from Martha to John C. Manises, remember that William and Molly are in between. William and Molly are are Ella's parents, not John Maness. So let's move on from William Maness and Molly Hackney. That's Ella Maness Morgan's parents. The next generation up is John C. Maness. John C. Maness was a Civil War veteran. You are eligible to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans through John C. Maness. His service is well documented. And if you'll give me just a second, I'll try to find his picture. We have it. John Maness, you might have seen this. I can't blow it up individually. He's in the middle there, but you see him with the beard. That's John C. Maness, who is a Civil War veteran. He fought in the 39th Georgia Regiment, and they had a reunion. And I don't know the exact year, but this is the reunion picture. And I think John C. Maness is somewhere in that picture, but I haven't taken the time to find him yet. But that's the 39th Georgia Regiment. I'm going to guess that was probably taken between 1900 and 1910. That's what I'm guessing. They're all old men. And that's the 39th Regiment. John C. Maness was, he fought in the Battle of Vicksburg, and then he went on to Chattanooga, and he was captured as a prisoner of war in Chattanooga and was in the Union prison there for a few months. And he was released in January of 1864. And so he had a service of several years in the 39th Regiment of Georgia in the Confederacy and fought with distinction. See, I still honor my Confederate veterans because they were fighting for their state. They weren't fighting to be bigots and be mean. They were people of their time. And many of them were honorable Christian men who raised good families, and they were good men. And I had many Confederate veterans in my line, and I still decorate their graves, and I still visit their graves, and I still honor them, just as the Union people should honor theirs. So don't talk to me about desecrating our ancestors' graves. You'll get me really angry quick. You know, I'm not a bigot. I love all people. I don't care what color you are. God loves you. I've got relatives, cousins that are black on both sides of my family, and you do too. We talked about that last video. We don't hate people, but we don't hate our ancestors either. That's not right to do that. You're supposed to honor your father and mother. They weren't perfect. They were sinners that had to be saved just like me, but they weren't devils. So anyway, enough of that. John C. Maness is buried at the Varnell Cemetery. Varnell's north of Dalton. And if some of you watching down in Georgia, you know all these places better than I do. And if I've not been, we want to go when the virus is over. But he's buried at Varnell, where a lot of your ancestors are. Varnell was this little crossroads area, had a train station in it. The train went from Knoxville to Dalton back and forth. And that's why a lot of your people go back and forth between East Tennessee and that part of Georgia, because the train ran that way. And Varnell Station was one of the stations on that stop. And so a lot of you people lived in that region of Varnell. And he's buried there. And Martha Cole, he married Martha Cole. John Maness died in 1910. And he's buried at Varnell Cemetery. Martha Cole died in 1911, a year after him. So she followed him pretty quick. I'm sure they were glad to be reunited, and she's at Varnell. And so your ancestor, John Maness, Confederate veteran. The next generation up from John, his father was William Maness. I guess that's why he named his son William A. Maness after his dad. William Maness was born in Tennessee in 1815. He married in 1838 to Martha Whitten. And she was born in North Carolina, but back then, in those early days, the border between North Carolina and Tennessee went back and forth. It was a lot of skirmishes fought, not just with Indians, but between settlers. There are records where the Manises fought they wanted to help establish, and their allied families wanted to help establish the state of Franklin, a little carved out area, which is today East Tennessee, and have their own state. That didn't work out. And when Tennessee was founded, things got a little more calm. But that's why you see some of your ancestors on those lines going back and forth between North Carolina and Tennessee. It was really Cherokee Indian country. So it goes back and forth. But the Wittens were technically in North Carolina, but it was all the same area. And they were farmers, of course, in that region. We do not know a whole lot of them. There are some people who say that William is buried in Arkansas because some of the Manises went out to Arkansas, and I've not been able to find that William's buried in Arkansas, but one researcher says he's buried in Snowball, Arkansas. But another descendant of William Manis who lives in Georgia, she says he's buried at Good Hope Church Cemetery. So if any of you are down around Good Hope Church, go see what you can find in their records there. Again, I've sent some emails, but nobody's answered me from the church. So I guess it's hard times with the virus. But this researcher says that William Manis died in 1884 and that he and his wife Martha were members of Good Hope Church, and that it's documented in the records and minutes of Good Hope, whoever's got those, and that they're buried there. So if anybody can find that out, that'll be a great thing. Because I'm not convinced that he's buried in Arkansas. William's dad was George R. Manis. Now, let me tell you something about this Manis. The Manises go back to Scotland. They go back to northern Scotland, Orkney and Caithness. And they're part of the clan, the Scottish clan called Gunn, G-U-N-N. And you can Google all of that. I don't have time to tell it to you. I'll be on here an hour and a half. But you can join Clan Gunn through the Manises. They are from northern Scotland. And they came over during the Jacobite Rebellion in 1715. That's when the Manises left and came to the New World. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But they are from Caithness and Orkney. They had their own language. They spoke a dialect of Gaelic, and they lived way north. They are known as the Viking Scots because their ancestry is Viking, Scandinavian. When Donna had her DNA done, it showed she had a sizable percentage of Scandinavian ancestry. You do too. The Vikings, first of all, came to the British Isles around the 10th century. And they fought and took control of the land, and children were born. Then William of Normandy came over in the 1000s, the 11th century, and his people settled throughout the British Isles. And the Normans were called Normans because they were descendants of the Norsemen, the Vikings who came into France. So they brought another line of the Vikings. And then in northern Scotland, the Vikings simply sailed across from Norway, and y'all have a lot of Norwegian DNA. The Vikings sailed across the channel to northern Scotland and intermarried with the people living there, the Gaelic people living there. So they're called the Viking Scots clan, the Clan Gunn. And I have their tartan here. All Scottish clans have tartans. And if you go to a Scottish ancestry, clan gathering or Highland Games or whatever, you'll see them wearing their tartans. This is your Clan Gunn tartan. You can order online kilts and scarves and mementos with your tartan on it. This is your tartan for Clan Gunn for the Manises. Manis was spelled a variety of ways. You can spell it M-A-I-N-S, M-A-N-E-S-S, M-A-N-E-S, M-A-N-U-S. Sometimes they spelled it Magnus, M-A-G-N-U-S. There's about 8 or 10 different ways that you'll see Manis spelled on different documents like census records, birth and death records, court minutes, and all. So you can see, if you see it, it's still the same family. People didn't read and write well for many centuries. They spelled phonetically. A lot of your census takers, they'd say, "What's your name?" And a woman might say, "My name's Marthy." What did they write on the census? Marthy. My name's Eller, for Ella. Eller. Ella Manises' name is on one of the census records as Eller Morgan, Eller. Anything that ended in A, the mountain people said ER, or they said EY. My grandfather's name was Latha. You know what they called him? Lathy. Everybody had an E on the name. It was Lathy and Marthy. So it was either ER or EY, and they spelled with phonics. So the names are often not spelled the same way. Okay, back to George. George Manis was born in 1782. He married in 1808 to Melinda Lawson, who was born in 1787. She died in Tennessee in 1864. There are researchers who say that George went out to Arkansas and that he's buried in Arkansas. He's either buried there or he's buried in Tennessee. We need to find out. Right now, I'm not convinced where he's buried. He was born on that line between Tennessee and North Carolina. He used to tell people he was born in North Carolina for political reasons. He would say that. All right, let's move on to the next generation, because this is the Revolutionary War ancestor for the Manises. George's dad was Seth Isham Manis. Now, I haven't verified that the I stands for Isham, but several researchers say it does. And there's some people in following generations that use that name Isham, Isham, and some people spell it Isom, Isham, Seth Isham. So that was probably his middle name. Seth was born in Virginia. So the Manises came from Virginia to the Tennessee-North Carolina border to Georgia eventually. Seth Isham was born in Virginia in 1762. He died in Tennessee in 1852. He lived to be 90 years old. He married Susan Fields, who also lived to be 90. She was born in 1763 and died in 1853. And I have some information that I've got on another computer right below me. And all of this is on the WikiTree chart. If you keep following it, clicking on those links up to Seth Isham Manis, it's spelled Maness on the chart here. And I'm trying to work with two mice here to move things, so it's getting a little confusing. Let me go to Seth and talk about him a minute. He married Susan, or some people call her Susanna Fields, and they had a lot of children. Seth Manis was a Revolutionary War patriot. Let me go down here to my information and tell you about him. There's so much on here, I have to scroll through it. His father was named William Manis, also William. They kept using that name, William. And his father, William, was born in Moore County, North Carolina. All right, Seth was born in Bedford County, Virginia in 1762. He died in 1849. Actually, he died in 1852. They got the date wrong here. Sometime between 1850 and 1852, he died. His will was probated, I think 1852 or 1853. You can find his will online if you want to read it. I'm not going to read all of that to you. He went to a court hearing in Hawkins County, Tennessee in 1832 to establish his Revolutionary War pension. And he told them in his pension what he did. Now, I'm going to read to you what he said to them. He entered service in September of 1780 under a man named Captain Williams and in the regiment of Captain Caswell in Moore County, North Carolina. And he said, we met at Bar Creek. He meant Bear Creek. You can find Bear Creek on a map so you can see where your ancestor was. A tributary of the Deep River. So a lot of you living up around the Triad know Deep River. I was drafted in service. We marched for the purpose of intercepting the Tories and the British, which were going through the county and doing mischief. We went on through Chatham County and other counties, which I do not recollect. I'm reading exactly what he wrote. We crossed Cape Fear River twice, and we went on towards Wilmington. He spelled it Williamington. We went on towards Wilmington. We marched southwest course, marched out where we were outing the Tories near the PD River when we met a soldier named Fannin at a place called Beatty's Bridge. In the action, we had to retreat. We collected together after the battle and marched toward Moore County, where we arrived in January of 1781. I served as a private, and I was gone for 4 months. I volunteered again in February 1781 under Captain Williams and Captain Butler to go after Fannin and his men. I volunteered again under Captain Williams and Captain Butler to march to Yorktown against the British, and we got as far as Hillsboro, where we were stationed and waiting for levies to come and join us. But while we were there, we received news that Cornwallis had surrendered, and we did not go. When we marched back, I was discharged, being gone 1 month at that time, and was never out anymore. So that was his deposition before the court in 1832. He got his pension, and it wasn't a whole lot, but he got it. And WikiTree has all of that information on it. And there was a man named Samuel Jasper Manises who in 1920 wrote his recollections of what his family had told him about his Revolutionary War ancestor, Seth Manises. He said, "My grandfather, Seth Manises, was a very peculiar man, and he had his price on everything. I remember his price on corn was 50 cents. It was no difference how low it got nor how high it got in the market. It was always 50 cents, and that's all he would take. After a few years, he stored up a big lot of corn, and a dry year came. One day, 10 wagons drove up, drawn by 2 yoke of oxen. Each had come 75 miles after some corn. They were quite a distance over the rough roads of Tennessee. That was about 1795 when that happened. Grandfather told them they could not buy his corn. They insisted they'd come a long way and they cared nothing for the price, and they had the money to pay him. He said, I know you have the money, and that's just why you can't have my corn. My price is 50 cents a bushel, no more, no less, but I have neighbors who don't have any money, and they can't buy corn just anywhere like you can, like men who have money, and I'm going to save the corn for them." And they went away and he sold his corn to the poor neighbors on credit. And that was the kind of man Seth Manises was. And that trait has cropped out occasionally along the whole line of the Manises family. So that's a story about your ancestor, Seth Manises, after the war. There's several little vignettes that you can find. I don't have time to read them all, like I said. And let's move on to again, he married Susan Fields. You can find a little bit about her family on that WikiTree link if you click on her. Seth Manises' father was William Jacob Manises Jr. William Jacob Manises Jr. was born in 1738 in Bedford County, Virginia. He died in 1832 in Moore County, North Carolina. He was also a Revolutionary War patriot. So he and his son Seth both served in the war. Again, they are descendants of the Scottish clan Gunn from northern Scotland, the Highland Scots. And there's lots of information on WikiTree about William. Let me get down to his service. He immigrated to North Carolina from Virginia around the year 1765 by wagon train. He stopped at the site of Smyrna Methodist Church near Robbins. So if you ever go up around that way at Grassy Creek, he settled near Bear Creek, which is what Seth called Bar Creek. In Cumberland County, he had 200 acres of land near Carter's Mill, and then he bought 100 acres more in the town of what's now Robbins, North Carolina. Then he bought 600 more acres, and of course he was a farmer. He enlisted in 1775 as a private in the 1st Battalion of the North Carolina Line of the Continental Army. It was very dangerous because most of the people living in Moore County were Scots who were loyal to the British. You know, during the Revolutionary War, 30% of the people who lived in North Carolina were loyal to England. 30% wanted independence and were patriots, and 30% were ambivalent. They just wanted to be left alone. They didn't take a political side. Did you know the political breakdown in America is about the same today? 30% are liberal, 30% vote conservative no matter what, and then there's 30% in the middle that either don't identify politically, don't care, or they can be moved one way or the other. That's why this election coming up is extremely crucial, because for one side or the other to win, they got to get that 30% in the middle. And it was exactly the same way back during the Revolution. 30% were for England. Your neighbors could have been loyalists, and you could have been a patriot. Cousins fought cousins, neighbors fought neighbors. It was dangerous. So it was dangerous for him to live in Moore County because a lot of the Scots were loyal. Not all the Scots were revolutionary patriots. So they were loyal. He was one of about a half a dozen local men who volunteered to fight for the American cause. He fought in the northern campaigns and did some guerrilla warfare fighting until 1783, and the military records show his last pay period was February 1785, which meant that was after the war. The war ended in 1783, but they kept some people on as peacekeepers to make sure these skirmishes didn't flare up after the peace treaty was signed in Yorktown. In 1790, he was on the census and had 6 sons and 7 daughters. The Manises family, big family. And after the war, he served as the constable of the township of Robbins. So if you go down to Robbins, your Manises ancestors are responsible for that. So that's William Manises Jr., Revolutionary War. His father was William Manises Sr., and he is the person who would be the immigrant from Dunfermline, Scotland. He was born in Fife, Scotland, about 715. And his father was John Maynard, sometimes called John Manises, who married Polly Garner. John and Polly and their young son William took the boat Hope's End to America in 1715. They left Scotland because of the Jacobite Rebellion. Now, if I get into what the Jacobite Rebellion was, that's a 1-hour history lecture. Go look it up. There were 2 Jacobite rebellions, 1715 and 1745. Your Manises ancestors left Scotland during the Jacobite Rebellion. Really, basically, what the Jacobite Rebellion was about was the British monarch was changing from house to house. The House of Stuart was going away. And some of these monarchs were leaned toward Catholicism and some toward Anglicanism. And whichever monarch was in power, it was difficult for the other side. And the Jacobite Rebellion was over who was going to be in power, and it kept going back and forth. And of course, there were some British monarchs at that time who leaned toward Catholicism, but Anglicanism always won out. And so the political situation was so dangerous and so difficult. They didn't really leave on religious grounds per se, although they were Anglicans. They left on political grounds because it was dangerous. And so they took a ship, Hope's End, in 1715. And that's when your Manises people, let me see if I've got another computer down here. Let me scroll down and see. There's lots of court minutes about land. They were land speculators. The early Manises were kind of like real estate agents. And they speculated a lot of land transaction. They got a lot of grants for lands because they were loyal, at that time, that early. And they just had a lot of land down there and speculated it. So I'm scrolling down trying to find the record where they came over from Scotland. Let me go to John Manises, their dad. John Manises was born in 1655 in Fife County, Scotland, and married Polly Garner. He died in 1728 in what was then Bertie County. They went from Bertie County to what's now Moore County. So they kept moving, moving, moving. You moved with what was going on in the country. You moved with where you could get land. So they go back to I'm going to skip a bunch of generations from John. The Manus line goes back to the 1200s to a man named Malcolm of Angus. Eventually, Malcolm of Angus, the family became Magnus, which eventually becomes Manus. You see how it works. So anyway, they came over on Hope's End in 1715. That would have been John, Polly, and their young son, William. William's son would be Seth, and Seth's son would be George, and George's son would also be William, and William's son would be John Manus, the Confederate veteran. John Manus' son was William A. Manus, and William A. Manus' daughter was Martha Ella Manus that married George Felix Morgan. Again, all that's on that WikiTree chart. So there's a lot on that chart you can read about different court records. You can link to their grave pages on Find a Grave. All of it's there. I'm going to stop with the Manises there. I'm at 35 minutes. It's a family. You have a lot to be proud of. It's a great family. So enjoy the Manus family. I think the next video, I'm going to do the Nicholsons, which probably will be a little bit shorter. I'm not doing every single line because some of the lines dead end and we don't know a lot about them. So don't get worried. I'm going to have 650 videos on here. I'm not. I'm hitting the highlights, but I want to do the Nicholsons because there's a couple of really colorful characters there. And if any of you doing research know things that I've left out, would you please put it in the comments underneath this video and share it? I'm not offended when people know more than I do. I'm not an expert. An expert is somebody from the next county with slides, and I have a couple of slides, but I'm not an expert. I'm a generalist. I just go looking and find. I'm a hunter and gatherer. I hunt and gather information. But I know some of you may know more than I do. Tell us. Fill in the gaps. Put some flesh on that skeleton. Y'all, I sure am enjoying doing this, and I hope you enjoy some of the stories and things. I got some good ones when we get to the Nicholsons. Again, for those of you just tuning in, I'm doing Papa side first, Delvin Morgan side, and then I'm going to go to Granny and do the Brookshires. And boy, you talk about when we get to Brookshires, that's your Daniel Boone line. Daniel Boone's your uncle. And we're going to talk about the Boones. Some of you may have been to Daniel's parents' graves in Davie County, Moxville. And so I've got so many illustrious people. It's just amazing. Well, I've just scratched the surface. Go on those WikiTree sites and read about them and look at their graves on Find a Graves, those that we know about. I'm going to get off of here. Love every one of you, and y'all have a good day. And I'm going to end the stream now if I can figure out how to do it. Bye-bye.